All right, let's dive right in. We're going to explore a really fascinating moment in history that was just buzzing with new energy. A time when the old answers just weren't cutting it anymore, which kicked off this massive search for ideas that would literally reshape how we see life itself. You know that feeling, right? That sense of whiplash when everything around you is shifting, and it leaves you feeling a little breathless, maybe a little unsure of things. Well, believe it or not, about 2,500 years ago, people all across India were feeling that exact same way. New cities were popping up, powerful new kingdoms were growing, and life in the villages was changing fast. It felt like the ground was shifting right under their feet. Yeah, as that familiar world of the village started to fade and was replaced by these busy cities and powerful kings, that old sense of certainty just vanished. People felt adrift. And you know, when you feel adrift, you start asking the big questions. Thinkers from all walks of life started to wonder, wait a minute, is this all there is? They were searching for the true meaning of life. So one of the most influential people to come out of this whole era was a prince, a guy named Siddhartha Gautama. He just wasn't satisfied with the answers he was getting, so he set off on this incredible journey to find the truth for himself. And his journey was just this radical transformation. I mean, think about it. As a young man, he walked away from a life of total comfort and luxury. He spent years just wandering, talking with other thinkers, having debates, but in the end, he had to find his own way. After meditating for days on end under a peepal tree at a place called Bodh Gaya, he finally got it. He attained enlightenment. And from then on, he was known as the Buddha, which simply means the wise one. His first stop as a teacher was a place called Sarnath. This stupa right here was actually built to mark the exact spot where the Buddha gave his very first sermon, where he started sharing the incredible knowledge he'd found with the rest of the world.
So what was this revolutionary message? What was the fundamental, game-changing insight that he discovered?
He taught that life is full of suffering. And this suffering, he said, really comes down to one thing: our own cravings and desires. He called it tanha, which means thirst. Think about it. We're always wanting something more, right? And even when we get it, we're not satisfied for long. We just move on to the next desire. It's a cycle that never really ends. Now, to make this idea really hit home, he didn't just lecture. He told stories. And one of the most famous is the story of a grieving mother named Kshatriya whose son had tragically died. She was just overwhelmed with grief, carrying her son's body through the streets, desperately looking for a cure. Someone finally guided her to the Buddha, who gave her this strange-sounding task. "Bring me a handful of mustard seeds," he said, "but they have to come from a house where nobody has ever died." So, she gets her hopes up and goes from door to door, but everywhere she goes, the story is the same. One family had lost a father, the next a child, the next a spouse. She couldn't find a single home, not one, that hadn't been touched by loss. And somewhere in that search, it just clicked. The Buddhist lesson wasn't about bringing her son back to life. It was about making her see that suffering and loss are universal. They're a part of being human. And the way forward isn't to try and escape that reality, but to calm that desperate thirst, that tanha, by following a middle path of moderation in all things. Now, around the very same time, another great thinker, a man named Vardhamana Mahavira, was out there teaching a very different path to the truth. The absolute foundation of Mahavira's teaching, which would become Jainism, is this principle of Ahimsa. And it's a powerful and simple idea. Do not hurt or kill any living being, period, no matter how small. Mahavira himself summed up the spirit of Ahimsa perfectly. He said, "All beings long to live. To all things life is dear." It's just this profound understanding that every single creature shares that same will to live. So this really lays out two very different ways of looking for the truth. You've got the Buddha, who advocated for a middle way, a path of moderation, and then you have Mahavira, who taught a much, much stricter path. For his followers, the Jains, finding the truth meant leaving your home, following these incredibly strict rules of nonviolence, and for men, it meant eventually giving up everything, even their clothes. But hold on, these weren't the only new ideas swirling around at the time. There was another group of thinkers who were exploring the very nature of reality itself in these amazing philosophical dialogues that we now call the Upanishads. So their big question was, what's really permanent in the universe? They ended up describing two key ideas, the Atman, which you can think of as the individual soul, and the Brahman,
which is the universal soul, the thing that fills everything. And here's their absolutely groundbreaking conclusion. They realized the two weren't separate. Ultimately, the individual soul and a universal soul were one and the same.
I know that's a pretty abstract idea, right? So, just like the Buddha, they use stories to explain it. Let's take a look at a famous one from the Upanishads called The Wise Beggar. So in this story, you've got two wise men, or sages, who are about to eat. A beggar comes up and asks them for food, but they refuse him. So the beggar asks them, "What god do you worship?" And they reply, "The universal soul." And then the beggar just hits them with this perfect piece of logic. He says, "Well, if the universal soul fills the whole world, then it fills me too. So by not giving me food, you're actually denying food to the universal soul." The sages, realizing he's totally right, immediately shared their meal.
Okay, so we have all these profound new philosophies, but how did they actually survive? How does an idea go from one person's mind to becoming a major world religion? The answer is all about how these communities got themselves organized.
The key institution here was the Sangha. This was basically an association for anyone who had left their home to go search for knowledge. These members, monks and nuns called bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, they led really simple lives. They meditated, they begged for their food, and they taught others. But here's what was truly radical for the time. It was open to absolutely everyone. It didn't matter what your social status was. You could be a Brahmin, a Kshatriya, a merchant, a laborer, even a slave. All were welcome.
And as these communities got bigger and bigger, they needed places to live, especially during the rainy season. So what started off as temporary shelters eventually became these permanent monasteries, or viharas. This incredible cave monastery you see here in Karle is a perfect example. These viharas became these essential hubs for living, meditating, and spreading these new teachings for centuries.
And that kind of brings us full circle, doesn't it? I mean, 2,500 years have gone by, but that fundamental human need to understand our world and our place in it, that hasn't changed at all. The details might look different, but the search for meaning is absolutely timeless. So I'll just leave you with this question. What are the questions that drive you?
Welcome to The Explainer. Have you ever stopped to think about how two of the world's great religions, Buddhism and Jainism, could pop up in the exact same time and place? It's pretty amazing, right? Well, today, we're digging into the incredible story of the crisis in ancient India that made it all happen. So let's set the scene. We're talking about the 6th century BC in India, and this was not just another century. The historian Will Durant called it a shower of stars, and that's the perfect way to put it. It was this time of incredible energy. New ideas were just exploding all over the place, challenging everything people thought they knew. And that brings us to the big question we're tackling today. This can't just be a coincidence. So what was going on? What was the perfect storm brewing in the Gangetic Plains that allowed not just one, but two huge new religions to take root? To figure that out, we have to look at what was broken. The old way of doing things, the old religious and social order, it was starting to crack. People were losing faith, and the whole system was in turmoil. Okay, so this slide really breaks down the pressure points. You had the Brahmin priests at the very top of a super rigid social ladder, which, didn't sit well with a lot of people. Then you have the rituals themselves. They'd become crazy complicated, expensive, and all the animal sacrifices were really hurting farmers. And on top of all that, a new wealthy merchant class was on the rise. They had the money, but they had no status. So you've got this society that is just hungry for something new. So out of this chaos, one of the first major alternatives to pop up was Jainism. And this was a path all about intense self-discipline and spiritual purity. The name itself tells you everything. The word Jain comes from Jina, which means conqueror. But we're not talking about conquering kingdoms or armies here. No, this is all about conquering your own inner world, your ego, your desires, all of it. And the person who really forged this path was Vardhaman Mahavira. What's so fascinating is that he was an insider, a Kshatriya prince. And at just 30 years old, he walked away from it all. I mean, imagine leaving a life of total luxury to go search for truth. He spent years in intense meditation and finally achieved what Jains call supreme knowledge. So what did he teach? Well, it boils down to this really clear 3-step path to break free from that endless cycle of rebirth. They call it the 3 jewels. And you can see how it works. It starts with having right faith in the teachings, which gives you the right knowledge to understand them. And all of that leads to right action, actually living it. And the absolute foundation of this whole thing, the bedrock, is Ahimsa. Now, this means nonviolence, but it's so much more than that. We're talking about a radical, deep commitment to not causing harm to any living thing in your thoughts, your words, and your actions. It's the core of everything. Now, over time, like with many belief systems, things evolved. After a really bad famine, a bunch of Jains moved south. This separation led to some different interpretations, and eventually the faith split into two main groups. The Digambaras, which means sky-clad, their monks didn't wear clothes, and the Svetambaras, or white-clad, whose monks wore simple white robes. But here's where it gets really interesting. Mahavira wasn't the only prince out there asking these huge questions. At the exact same time, another movement was starting to form, one that offered a very different answer to the exact same crisis. This was the middle way. And here we have this amazing parallel story. This is Siddhartha Gautama, another prince. But his journey wasn't about choosing to leave luxury. It was sparked by being suddenly slammed with the reality of human suffering, something he'd been completely protected from his whole life. So the story goes that at age 29, Siddhartha left his palace and saw what are called the four great sights. For the first time ever, he saw an old man, a sick man, a dead body, and then a peaceful holy man. And seeing this just shattered his reality. It set him on this quest to figure out what suffering was and how to end it. After years of searching, he finally achieved enlightenment and became the Buddha, the enlightened one. And his core teaching is summed up so perfectly in the Four Noble Truths. It's almost like a doctor's diagnosis. 1, the symptom is that life has suffering. 2, the cause is desire. 3, good news, there's a cure, you can end the suffering. And 4, here's the prescription, follow the Noble Eightfold Path. So the Buddhist solution was this middle way. It wasn't about living in a palace, but it also wasn't about extreme self-denial either. It was a balanced path. And the whole point, the ultimate goal, was to reach nirvana, a state where you're totally free from suffering and that endless cycle of life and death. Okay, so you've got these two powerful new philosophies, both born from the same crisis, both led by princes who gave it all up. But what happened next? Well, their legacies took two very, very different paths. And this is where their stories really diverge. It kind of came down to politics. Jainism didn't get a ton of support from kings, so it spread slowly, mostly staying inside India. But Buddhism, it got a huge boost from powerful emperors, which acted like rocket fuel, helping it spread all across Asia. And this really is the bottom line. Buddhism became this huge global religion. But funnily enough, it eventually faded away in India where it started. Jainism did the exact opposite. It stayed put and has kept a continuous, unbroken presence in India right up to today. One went wide, one went deep, but both found a way to last. Which leaves us with a final thought. That search for meaning, the thing that drove two princes out of their palaces 2,500 years ago, that's a timeless human quest. In our own crazy time of big changes, it makes you wonder, what new answers are we looking for today?